Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're completely dismantling Hollywood myths to uncover the fascinating and honestly, sometimes utterly absurd realities of how intelligence agencies actually recruit their spies. So, whether you're a longtime espionage enthusiast or you're just kind of curious about this secret world operating right under our noses, you're going to see that the truth is often way stranger than fiction.
Okay, let's just dive right in by asking the core question at the heart of our source material today. How does someone actually end up in the shadowy world of espionage? I mean, it's a world literally built on secrecy, right? So how on earth do they go about finding the right people to keep those secrets?
Well, as you'll see, the real process is actually far less like the explosive, action-packed thrills of the show 24, and shockingly, much more akin to the corporate mundanity of The Office. It's wild. But it's worth noting that it wasn't always a sterile human resources process.
Section 1. The eccentric early days, MI6 and the flinch test. Before we get to those modern HR departments, we really have to look back at the bizarre, almost Monty Python-esque origins of British intelligence.
And that brings us to a guy named Captain Sir Mansfield Smith Cumming. He was the famously eccentric founder of MI6, which was originally called the Secret Service Bureau, and he's the literal historical inspiration for the character M in the James Bond series. And let me tell you, his methods for screening early candidates were, well, they were incredibly unconventional.
This story just brilliantly illustrates his eccentricity. Cumming had actually lost a leg in a traffic accident in 1914, so he used a wooden prosthetic. During interviews, which he'd conduct under the guise of some boring, mundane government department, he would suddenly and violently stab his own wooden leg with a penknife right in the middle of a conversation. If the oblivious candidate flinched even a little bit, they failed the secret spy test and were immediately shown the door. It was literally a two-for-flinching elimination process.
Section 2. Officers, Agents, and Applications. Clarifying the jargon. Let's fast forward to the modern day and clear up a major misconception that Hollywood constantly gets wrong before we look at how recruitment actually works today.
So there is a very distinct, absolutely crucial difference between these two terms. When you watch a movie, they tend to call everyone a CIA agent. But in reality, an officer or an operative is the direct employee of the agency. They're the recruiter. An agent, on the other hand, is the foreign asset. That's the scientist or the diplomat who is actually being recruited to hand over the information.
So how do you actually become an officer? Well, you don't get tapped on the shoulder in a dark alley by some mysterious figure in a trench coat. You literally just go to their website and submit a surprisingly standard job application. They're looking for citizens with a minimum 3.0 GPA, a bachelor's degree, and ideally fluency in multiple languages. They also really love degrees in finance, economics, nuclear science, or engineering. Now, the vetting process is extensive and can take up to a year for sure, but that initial step, it's exactly like applying for any standard corporate gig.
Section 3. Social media as spy cover. Hiding in plain sight. Now, what's really interesting about this next concept is how these officers actually live once they get hired. You might think having a loud, public life disqualifies you, right? Actually, it helps.
Former CIA operations officer Douglas London hits the nail on the head here, noting that cover is best tailored to reality. Agencies actually prefer officers to leverage their real, highly visible public personas to completely mask their covert activities. If you're already a journalist, or say you run a massive educational YouTube channel and you travel the world, the agency loves that.
I know it sounds counterintuitive, but being highly visible, it makes your cover virtually bulletproof. Think about it. If someone does a deep dive into your background, all they're going to see is a totally legitimate, highly demanding professional life. You are quite literally just doing your day job, like meeting foreign dignitaries for an interview, while clandestinely passing or gathering intelligence on the side. It's so overt that it becomes perfectly covert.
Section 4. The Art of Long Seduction, Recruiting an Agent. Okay, so that's how an agency hires an officer. But how does that officer actually go out into the field and flip a foreign target into an agent?
It all starts with a highly psychological tactic known simply as the bump. And it's exactly what it sounds like. An officer will orchestrate a fleeting, physical interaction, literally just bumping into a target at a busy conference. They might drop a jovial remark like, "Wow, do you like crowds as much as I do?" And then they just walk away. The entire goal here is just to plant a subconscious seed and register a friendly face in the target's memory.
Let's see how this builds into what's known in the biz as the long seduction pipeline. We start with the bump. Next, the officer might dive deep into the target's hobbies. As an example, one former CIA officer took up scuba diving specifically because a target loved it, and they used those lessons to build deep, one-on-one trust. Then, they foster dependency. A classic tactic here is anonymously funding an academic target's research. Once that money is accepted, the target is on the hook. Only after months or sometimes even years of this careful orchestration does the officer finally make the pitch, revealing their true affiliation and asking the target to officially become an agent.
Section 5. High Stakes and Historic Spies, Operations in the Field. Now we're going to look at how these exact tactics play out in high-stakes, real-world operations, where the margin for error is absolutely zero.
You have to realize, intelligence agencies go to unbelievable lengths to facilitate these bump and seduction moments. They will literally fund and host entire fake academic conferences. The CIA has even been known to plant operatives as kitchen staff and janitors to drug the food of security details, all just to get a few unmonitored minutes alone with a high-value target, like an Iranian nuclear scientist.
And when they finally get those few minutes, they have to act incredibly fast. In one instance, a CIA officer cornered an Iranian scientist in a hotel room while his guards were sleeping. He knocked, the target answered, and the officer immediately pitched him, but told him to grab the ice bucket first so he'd have an instant, believable alibi if his sleeping guards happened to wake up.
To convince someone to leave their entire life behind in a split second like that, the pitch has to be massive. The agency offers immediate extraction and long-term safety for family members. In one specific case with an Iranian engineer, they even pulled literal strings at MIT to secure a fast-tracked, fully waived PhD screening process for the defector. They pull out all the stops.
But while the long seduction is the standard, agencies also occasionally rely on what are known as walk-ins. This is when a target essentially recruits themselves. A historic example of this is Soviet Colonel Oleg Pankovsky. He casually approached some American students on the street in Moscow and just handed over a package. Once he was vetted, the intelligence he provided to the US and UK was so absolutely critical that it actually helped prevent nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
But walk-ins are pretty rare. The more common and honestly sometimes most devastating method is university recruitment. Take the career of Ana Belén Montes. She was an outspoken university student in the US when she was approached and flipped by Cuban intelligence. For 17 years, she worked her way up to become a top analyst at the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, secretly acting as a double agent for Cuba the entire time, before she was finally caught shortly after 9/11. It's a really stark example of how effective targeting young, pliable students can be.
Montes herself actually provided a very stark perspective on this entire apparatus. As she neutrally reflected after her capture, the morality of this espionage system is entirely relative depending on which side of the border you're standing on. To one country, you're a traitor, to another, you're a hero. The underlying activity, however, always requires betrayal.
So, as we wrap up this explainer on the realities of spy recruitment, it leaves us with a rather chilling final thought to take with you to your next academic conference or networking event. If someone bumped into you, started taking a deep interest in your hobbies, and offered to fund your work, would you even recognize the long seduction happening to you?